we need to start making more conscious material choices.
Set up an initiative called Make Fashion Circular.
It's a tsunami of change.
Hello and welcome to The Diff, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's online events broadcasting series. My name is Colin Webster and I have the pleasure of asking the questions at today's session. But I'm not the only one who has the pleasure of asking questions. We're asking you, our audience, to put in your thoughts and questions as this session goes out live. Use the comments box on the page you're watching this on, or use the hashtag ThinkDiff on Twitter, and our team will feed your questions to me and I'll pass them on to our interviewees in the studio here today. Today we're going to speak to 4 different designers. We've got 2 award-winning designers from Ireland who'll join us a little bit later. We have a fashion designer in Thailand who thinks who is part of a movement to revolutionise the entire textiles industry. But first, we're joined by a materials designer and textiles designer who believes we should be taking more attention to the materials that surround us. It's the founder and director of Maire. Everyone, please welcome Seetal Solanki. Seetal, for over a decade you've worked in materials design and textiles design. I've read through your website, I've read some articles with you. You think we should be paying more attention to the materials that surround us. You really believe in the idea of educating people about materials. Could you tell us a little bit more about why you think that's important?
Well, when you think about it, everything is made of something. And that has an impact across every single industry, every single sector, and every single one, and therefore has an impact on the planet. So if we start to rethink and re-educate and somehow understand what surrounds us and what we use on an everyday basis has an impact beyond ourselves. So if we understand what something is made of, we understand the material. So the material allows us to figure out where its raw material comes from, how it then is being processed, how it then degrades. So the life cycle of the material, it needs to be understood for it to then be used responsibly. So what we're really doing is we have part of a school, which is very much about educating people around materials. So that can be public facing. We'll do a lot of work with schools as well. We do a lot of work with clients ranging from corporations like Nike and Google to individuals. And then that's very much around workshops, talks, demos, and that kind of thing. And then that allows us to really build a bit more of a strategic approach to how they can actually apply them. So that can be in the form of consultancy. So we'll do that, more advisory. And then we also have a design studio, which is very much what we do as a practice, is changing the narrative around materials. Because at the moment, we only understand them as metal, wood, and plastic and glass. And this is very limited. And this limitation doesn't allow us to really fully appreciate materials' characteristics. So a material can also be soft, like wood, for example. There's lots of fabrics and fibers that are made from cellulose, which is made from wood fiber. So that allows the wood to be soft. There's obviously paper, and then there's obviously solid versions of wood. So the variations of a single source, it allows it to have many different textures and qualities and applications.
And I mean, you talked about a broad range of people there that are involved in the work that you're in. Is understanding more about materials something you think that the broader public should get to grips with? And what would be the benefits if so?
Most definitely. I think in the past, I would say materials has very much been in the sciences and in academia, I would say. And my role in Maire is very much about bringing it to a wider audience. So it's not just the people who know about this subject and get to appreciate it or be involved in it. It's about addressing it to the wider audience and the wider public. because they're the majority, I would say. And therefore that has a much wider impact. And we're trying to make materials more accessible and relatable. So that then has a knock-on effect to the way people behave with their belongings and how they consume. So it's really important for it to be widely understood.
So this is about a personal responsibility, I guess. If we understand the work that's gone into making the stuff that surrounds us, perhaps we'd be less wasteful, is that?
Most definitely, yeah. So it'd be less wasteful. They would be more conscious in the way that they are consuming and purchasing things. Maybe they reuse things, or maybe they would adopt a way of having a zero waste lifestyle. There's so many impacts that it can have if they understand what their objects are made of or what they're using is made of.
And so to that end, you have published this book, Why Materials Matter. This was last year, this was published.
Yeah.
You tell us a little bit about what we might find inside this book.
Yeah, of course, and it definitely relates back to this idea of making materials more accessible. So this book is very much about bridging the gap between academia and sciences and making it more wider appeal. So in this book, you'll find not just your woods, metals and plastics, you'll also find materials that are made from bacteria or digital materials or materials that are made from air and water. Or water as a material. So I think it's widening the vocabulary around materials and getting people to really not just navigate, but also understand the world around them, and actually what designers, artists, scientists, chefs even, I've included in the book, really are engaging with this practice. And it's not just design. It's also addressing the food system, it's also addressing architecture, so lots of different scales. So we've got students featured in the book to corporations that are actually doing it on scale. So various scales as well as various industries.
And I know there's a couple of specific examples we're going to come to in a minute, but let me ask you this question. When you speak to people maybe for the first time about you work in materials, what's the materials facts, the really quirky things you might have up your sleeve that you can tell people about, something that surprises them?
So even the most granular level, even the micro level, can be a material. So something like a bacteria is something that's driving material change that can actually be biodegradable. So something invisible is actually being made visible. I think that is kind of a bit mind-blowing to me.
Okay, now let's go into an example then we picked out from the book earlier. It's about, you mentioned water before and how water can be used. And you were telling me this off camera earlier. I was really struck by this example. Tell us about the coconut water.
Yeah, so it's a studio called Maire. They're based in South India in a coconut farm, actually. So they are really driving change within the wastewater that's being produced with coconut water. So it's the water that isn't drinkable. So what they're doing is they found a naturally occurring bacteria within the coconut water, which is, and it enables it to grow in a humid environment. If left within like up to 2 weeks, it can grow a film-like texture, which sort of grabs itself onto sisal fibers, which is a natural fiber, and it creates a substrate. And that substrate feels like a leather, basically. So it's an entirely bespoke grown leather-like material which isn't killing animals, and it's completely biodegradable. And it's really durable at the same time. So they are now putting it into footwear, furniture, and what's quite amazing with it is fabrics and leather obviously have lots of waste because the way that it's being cut, you get offcuts. So those offcuts are rarely used. And with this technique of growing your own material, it means you can grow a specific mold for the shape you require. So I think that's kind of ingenious, so there's no waste effectively in the material process.
And I think we've got a couple of images of this coconut leather in use. Could you tell us, like, how does it compare in terms of functionality with cow's hide leather? Like, where's the differences between the two?
I would say the difference is maybe the visual difference. I would say is it's probably less buttery, like with some leathers. I think it's still got the durability as a leather. It hasn't obviously been tested, or does it last 200 years? That's yet to be defined, but I think it's got similar qualities as a leather. It's definitely got that grain that you would find with a leather, and the toughness as well.
Oh, wow. So, I mean, and in terms of the entire system as well, it's more beneficial. Did you say it was biodegradable too?
Completely biodegradable.
That's remarkable. And of course, there's no animals being reared in order to make the leather too, so...
Exactly.
Yeah, there's many advantages there.
Yeah, and it's also using a byproduct from a factory that would normally put it to waste, and that coconut water has so much bacteria within it, so it does end up harming water streams as well. So they're kind of saving it from having that impact as well.
The theme of the diff this year is, or rather this September, is This Is How We Did It, and we're looking to find out what the stories are behind how someone's managed to achieve something. You've achieved the writing of this book, and I'd just like to know, like, where's the original idea come from for you to put something like this together?
It really stems on my own frustrations. I would say when being asked, what do I do for a living? And I would say I'm a textile designer or a materials designer sometimes, depending on my mood. The usual response would be, oh, can you make me a dress? And yes, I can, but I can also potentially make a textile that could power your home. So the limited knowledge of what textiles and materials can achieve and material designers can achieve, I think needs to be represented somehow. So not just this book, but Matter really is about making a stand, making it more wider known to what materials and material designers can do. And this book is very much showing that in reality, what people are actually achieving with materials. So it's very much about bringing materials to the forefront and getting people to change the way that they design and think.
And was that your pitch to, say, the publishing house, that this is why this book should be produced?
They actually approached me to write a book, and it was something that was on my agenda, but I just didn't think it would happen so soon. So it was, it just catapulted me into a way that I had to get it out there. And it was great timing as well, because now the conversation is achieving quite a lot, I think, in terms of its global reach with the book. It's something physical and tangible for people to understand. I've used a language that is very accessible, but yet with the scientific backing with it. So it's, now it's in second print, which is quite amazing considering it's not even been a year yet.
Now, I work with the MacArthur Foundation, so perhaps I live in a bubble around ideas related to materials and different uses of them. But I do get the sense, and everyone links it to the David Attenborough documentary, that in the public's eye there's been a lot more conversation about materials recently, plastics in particular. You're wearing a pair of shoes right now that speak to all of that. Can you tell us about the Converse shoes you've got on?
Yeah, of course. So what's been great recently is Converse have launched a new campaign called Renew, and we've had the privilege of working with them on launching the product. And so the laces and the eyelets are made from recycled plastic, and then the sole of the shoe is made from recycled rubber. So they're making leaps and strides in making their product from more responsible choices and sources. And so we've been able to not only educate the staff around their material choices and understand the processes behind making these materials and the outputs that they have, it's also educating the people that are selling it. So we've been working with Foot Locker and Office and seen displays of the people that actually got us involved, and they designed the space, which we were really overseeing of what material choices they were making, where they were sourcing them from. So a lot of the materials were borrowed, reclaimed sources and actually rented. So it was a 3-day event that happened in King's Cross. So not only are the shoes telling a story, but the whole event was telling a story. And not many of the materials were processed either. So they had very little impact in terms of the way that they were cut or sliced. We left a lot of the materials quite whole, and therefore they had a second life because they could be returned to the supplier, which is amazing. And then the stools that people were sitting on, they were all modular, so they were all slotted together, so they didn't have any fixtures or fittings applied to it either. So the entire launch and the product is quite circular, I would say.
Top diff fact for you, the sofa you're sitting on and the chair I'm sitting on, also modular. We're going to speak to the designer of these this furniture a little bit later in the
That's
diff.
pretty great.
Yeah, it's great, isn't it? Yeah. So what was the reaction of the Converse staff, the Foot Locker staff, to these ideas that we could be using reclaimed materials, or of course you were showing them materials that hadn't been processed? How did they respond to this at this event?
They were quite surprised, I think, and a bit of surprise, shock and awe in a way. And what was really great in terms of their reaction was these shoes don't look any different to the usual iconic Chuck Taylor, and I think that's what's so amazing. It's quite deceptive in a way, and then once they understand, oh, these are made from recycled plastic, they're like, no way. Like, so this sort of surprise and delight, I think, enables curiosity, and that curiosity then gets them to ask loads of questions, and those questions get them to rethink the way that they are living and consuming. And that's the reaction that I got across the board, I think.
But the implication of that reaction is that people still expect materials that have been reclaimed and recycled to be of a poorer quality, I guess.
True, definitely. And they also think the aesthetic is also compromised, I think, a lot of the time. And this hasn't been. So it just looks like an identical canvas Chuck Taylor.
Have we got our shoes on camera? Does she need to wiggle them in there? No, we're good. You don't have to to dangle them up in the air. That's great. So how does one go about? I mean, there'll be we've got a couple of young designers joining us in a few minutes here. So the question for a lot of designers watching this might be, how do they get involved with the Converses of this world? I know you've worked with Beyonce and Nike as well. You've got quite a hit list there. How does someone get into that position?
Well, I've been doing it for quite a long time. So I've been working in the industry for about 15 years now. So, I've paid my dues. And I feel so much of it is about the way you communicate your services or your product or your brand. And I think it's about being open, I would say, and being approachable. And I think if you're telling a truthful story and it shows, I think that idea of being honest about who you are and what you're doing, it resonates with others. But I think it's all about experience. And previously to Matter, I was working with lots of different companies and designers. So Alexander McQueen, and you've named a few like Nike and Beyonce, and automotive industry like Nissan. So all of these experiences enabled me to understand how other industries work. So it didn't seem like it was a well thought out plan in terms of my career. And I think that's the benefit of hindsight in a way. And even though it seemed really, unplanned and not very strategic, I just really wanted to experience what a textile designer could do and what textiles could achieve. So I just tried to do everything I could possibly do. And all of those experiences There's a lot of risk taking, basically, and that risk taking served me well going now into my 15th year of working. So time is a really important element, trusting yourself, taking risks. I think all of these elements are really important. So patience is good.
In terms of what's next, I understand your publishing career does not end with this book. There's something else brewing, is that right?
Yeah, the second book is kind of brewing at the moment, and that's going to be more about terminology around materials. And so it's going to be in the form of a glossary. So that's one part, and this is in the works at the moment. So it'll probably be 2021. It'll be available. And then we're working on a number of things at the moment. So we've worked with a hotel in Bali where we've been able to work with a brand called Potato Head, and they're very much really wanting to set an example with how hospitality is being built and designed and received. And so they are rethinking and redoing the entire system of hospitality. So we've been working with them, mapping the island of its natural resources and also waste, because on the island they don't have any recycling because the government doesn't support it because they earn too much money receiving waste. So this is kind of problematic. But what's amazing is there's a real bottom-up approach in terms of how the island is working. So this particular hotel is using the waste as the material. So they've set up a bit of a laboratory. They've even built some of the precious plastic machines as well. So they've been able to start engineering and recycling plastic themselves. And that material has been applied into the interior. So we've been helping design the interior with mapping the natural resources and the waste. So we've helped design the interior, and the designers we've got involved are Max Lam and Faye Toogood, and the building has been designed by OMA. And we've had a real great exchange with the people on the island who already have craft skills. So craftspeople and designers from Europe are having this skills and knowledge exchange with how they can make it more contemporary and a bit more, I guess, fitting into a contemporary context, but the skills are being somehow elevated and applicable to what we need now more than like just making things for tourism.
Earlier you said you were somewhat dissatisfied with the term textiles designer. I can see why. You obviously get involved much more, much wider than process than simply designing textiles. Seetal, we're going to pause the conversation with you there for a minute.
Great.
And we're going to come back to you as we discuss perhaps circular life cycle of materials as the session develops. But let me introduce my next guest. In 2013, a garment factory in Bangladesh collapsed, killing 1,100 people and injuring many more. The 8-story Rana Plaza facility housed lots of fashion houses that are very familiar to us. And it appears to have been the case that in the collapse of this facility, all the usual problems were evident, that enough checks were not done on the facility, staff weren't paid fair wages as well. Was another part of that particular problem. But from that disaster sprung some action. Our next guest helps run the Fashion Revolution Thailand, a movement that aims to address some of the problems that were obviously brought to light in the Rana Plaza disaster. So ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce to you, please, Kamon. Hello, Kamon. Kamon, I think we're muted just now, so let's just see if we can sort that out at our end. How we've got you there. That's brilliant. Kamon, thanks. Thanks very much for joining us. Could you please tell us a little bit about the origins of Fashion Revolution Thailand?
Yes, of course. So actually, Fashion Revolution is originated in the UK with two amazing designers, Ursula and Carrie Somers. But in Thailand, it was around 4 years ago where the movement started to come in after I come back from the UK. So at the time when I was a student in the UK, I happened to meet some of the people from the fashion revolution. And then at that point, I knew that like the problem inside the fashion industry need to be speak out and need to be a workout. So at that point, I joined them as a student ambassador and then bring it back to Thailand.
And how have people reacted to the idea of the movement?
So at that time, when I moved back to Thailand, it happened that the conversation about circular economy or even sustainability, sustainable fashion is still very early stage. It was a starting point, but it was very exciting. So when I first talked about this in ResUp, there were many questions and there were many like doubts and suspect from organizations or designers, like fellow designers. But throughout the year, thanks to the single-use plastics and marine plastic in the ocean, news from Southeast Asia, many more people are getting aware about the problems that the industry as a whole, or why circular economy and sustainability is a big thing in the future. So that's like a great timing.
Could you tell us a little bit about some of the arguments that you're making? I know there's issues on pay, there's issues on inclusiveness. Could you just tell our viewers a little bit more about this?
Yeah, so the key main thing that Fashion Revolution is trying to make is about transparency. So we see transparency as a tool of change to make people feel accountable for the problem, because you cannot fix the problem that is kept in the dark. So transparency is the first step, and from that point you can achieve the goal. So from like our working, like our principles of work, we always say that circular economy or sustainability wouldn't be possible without disclosure of information in a supply chain, or where the origins of the materials came from and how much the workers get paid. So that is the main argument of our movement. And with that argument, we encourage citizens, people in general, to use the hashtag Who Made My Clothes to ask brands and retailers to disclose information we need to take them into account. So from that point, like the conversation about human rights, working conditions, and environmental impact are starting to come up in the consumer's mind, because they start to ask questions. So that's like our main thing.
Is this consumers worldwide or in a particular geography?
Actually, it's a worldwide movement, but in Thailand we do a little bit different, because we do a lot of localized activities and events. Yeah.
I'm just going to take this moment to speak to the audience once more to say that please put in your thoughts and your questions to us here in the studio, and we'll put them direct to our guests. Use the hashtag ThinkDiff or use the comment section on the page. Perhaps you've used the hashtag Come On just referred to. Let us know if you have, and we will bring that up. Come on, I want to talk about the circular aspects of your design manifesto, because Fashion Revolution Thailand as a 10-point manifesto covers many different angles. 1.6 talks about fashion conserves and restores the environment, which might be a surprising statement to some people. And secondly, fashion never unnecessarily destroys or discards. They seem like very lofty ambitions for a wasteful textiles industry. Can you tell us what the reaction has been to those points?
So I think it's a very daring statement, because when people think about the fashion in the industry or the textile industry, we often think about beauty, aesthetics, or waste. But when we say these kind of statements, often people are confused, like how can you make fashion sustainable or environmental friendly? So our job is to show them how to make that happen. Especially in Thailand, where it's a rare case that people would understand the impact of their disposing consumption behavior. But if we look globally, the fashion industry is actually the very big market. It's a $3 trillion industry. but it emits like 10% of the whole global carbon emission. So something is crucial there. When I start to talk about this problem, and when I try to show people how fashion can be environmental friendly, I first ask them like, do you know where your shirt comes from? And before it comes to your hand, before it comes to you, where does it have to go through? So people start to think back and in their mind, or sometimes they draw the map that, and they understand that, oh, actually there are enormous amount of agricultural chemicals, in pesticides, insecticides, and wastewater being used in the dyes and finishing of our garments, textile. And actually the textile sector is the second highest water polluter in the world, and it contributes to like a lot of water chemical going into our ocean. So from that point, when people think about the impact of their like simple t-shirt, they start to feel more aware and question more next time they're gonna buy something, if they have to buy it or if they have to like, can they repair or can they borrow from a friend? So they start to rethink their consumption patterns. And also for the discard and disposal problem, not many people know that actually the big amount of waste in the textile industry actually happened before it reached the customer's hand. So it's in the industry stage. So overproduction and leftover from the industry is actually the big amount of waste. And brands and factories often destroy the fabrics and the materials by burying them or throwing in the landfill or even burning, which impacts on a lot of pollution and well-being of people. So I try to draw like a map and connect each point for the simple and make it simple for people to understand. So then they start to feel like, wow, I've never knew that before. And after that, they start to say that, okay, next time I'm gonna buy a t-shirt, I might think a little bit more. So this is just one of the few examples of how I manage to convince people to think about their impact of their consumption.
Sounds like a big map, got to say.
Yeah, but I mean, like just a simple question, and they start to like, whoa, I never knew before. Yeah, that's the main reaction.
I think the circular economy equivalent of the chicken and the egg conundrum is it industry we go to first? Is it the public you go to first in order to make the change and move us towards something circular? I'll ask you that question in a minute as well, Seetal, but come on, what's your response to that? You've talked about both. Where does the majority of change happen, with industry or with the consumers?
Okay, I would say it's a two-way conversation. So I will speak in the context of Thailand, my country. So few years ago when I started talking about this conversation, many people came to me and said, oh, thank you for speaking out, because I've thinking about this a long time, but there's no movement and there is no domain where people come together and talk about these things or demand, show the demand. And often brands says that, oh, because there's no demand, so it's not necessary for them to transform or adapt or make something, make some solutions. So it's like, brand wait for consumers to change, while consumers cannot fully change without the support from business and brands, I would say. For example, there are many awareness and the people trying to change behaviors in Thailand for now, but the lack of ecosystem and waste management is still the main barrier. So I think it's like two-way conversation at this point.
You're nodding away, Seetal. You find a lot to agree with there?
Definitely, and I would also add the fact that there needs to be a policy change. So I think government needs to be involved. So yes, it's great to have a bottom-up approach, but it's also vitally important to have a top-down. So I think a lot of this policy change is kind of trying to be driven from a bottom-up approach. So it's about meeting in the middle. So policy change needs to happen for it to actually impact something. Then it becomes law. So if it's, for example, in the fashion industry in the UK, we had the Environmental Audit Committee that actually launched a policy change in government, which was going to have a 1p tax based on every new garment being created. Unfortunately, this government at the moment has other priorities, so they've left that to one side for the moment. But things like this will really have an effect on the way things are being produced, let alone being consumed. So I think ultimately it's about the bottom up working with policy, and that's exactly what happened with the Environmental Audit Committee. So people like from the Fashion Revolution, people from like other designers were really involved with MPs to be able to encourage change to happen. So I think it's such a collaborative effort, and it's not just driven by one area. So it can be design, it can be policymakers, it can also be scientists and anthropologists, and it's such a collective effort, and it's more of a collective vision to be able to create change.
And I think that works with us as well, in the way in which we see the complexity of the system around these problems. Okay. I want to jump back to Thailand just for a final question here. Come on, you've been involved in the work we've done with the Circular Design Guide, and I know that you've been trying to take the circular economy to people in Thailand. How's that experience been? Is Thailand ready to listen to a circular economy, or do you think there's a difference across geographies?
It's a different geography, I would say. It's a difficult answer. I think it's not that the country isn't ready for a circular economy, but I would say that the main challenge is the economic barrier. So like it's quite hard when you want to get the conversation started for people who might not prioritize sustainability or environment as their core values, and the profit and bottom line are still like the main thing. Also the lack of awareness in education, or most importantly, the lack of safeguarding policies from the government also act as the main thing for that the business here didn't feel the urgency to change, or the urgency to launch some circular initiative, or act fast enough to respond to the circular economy. However, I think also the main challenge is also the cheap labor market that floods in from China, Vietnam, and across Asia. And when people constantly find themselves among cheap goods and like incredibly cheap, it's hard to get them to answer the bigger questions. So that's like the challenges. But also there are great news as well for Thailand. I would say this year there are many more events, activities, actions that we see from the private sectors, the governments, and the UN coming together in general. So there's a pledge of stop giving out single-use plastics. There's a collaboration across sectors and people. But the most promising trend for me is actually the localization trend for Thailand, where people start to go back to embrace their roots, the Asian culture, and the values of like giving, repairing, and caring for a community. So related to what you work on, Seetal, like working with locally abundant materials like banana fibers, bamboo, hemp, mushroom, coconut water is something like really big in Thailand right now, where young designers are starting to work with again, looking at resource within the community we have, and thinking about how these resources can solve community challenges and not like theoretical or global questions is more relevant for young designers here. So answering the whole challenges together in this way, the localization, social innovation, and circular economy can come hand in hand. when it's related to the locals. So I think in this approach, it's the same thing with making materials or textiles. Like we weave the community together, and we weave them together by bonding with local materials or wisdom that they see the common values, and now we can create a movement. We can activate something from the ground. So that's pretty exciting for me.
Certainly sounds exciting. Come on, thank you very much, Seetal. Also, round of applause for Seetal, and come on, everyone. Thank you both. Last year, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation shot a film called System Reset. It features many different voices talking about how our economy is changing. Because we're talking about materials, let's hear now from our materials expert in that film, Alicia Garmalevich, who's going to tell us about how the materials palette might well be changing for us in the future.
Digital and meeting the physical world in this new economy. The amazing opportunity we have is to take inspiration from natural materials which are architected at all these multiple scales, so from the nano all the way to the macro level our eyes can see. And what we can now do with digital fabrication technology, like 3D printers, for example, we can actually start to architect materials, lay down structure and pattern and geometry that enables simple building blocks, very, very simple material ingredients that are useful for ecosystems, that are nutrients for larger systems that we're all dependent on. These simple building blocks can be assembled in very complex ways. And because we have the technology now to do that, it opens up a world of material performance that currently we try and achieve with a lot of chemistry that is not very good for anyone, as well as methods that use high pressure and high temperature. And so when you can substitute structure for chemistry, when you can substitute all of these industrial methods for the elegance of fabricating with digital technology, digital fabrication technology, it opens up the potential of creating an economy of the future that relies on material performance, but with a shared palette, we can all participate.
So that's Alicia Garmalevich talking in the film System Reset. And if you want to see that film, you can see it on the ThinkDiff website. And keep those questions coming in, folks. We've got two designers coming up in just a second. So put your questions into the comments box on this page, or use hashtag ThinkDiff, and we'll get them to our next two designers. Now, for the last 95 years, the RSA has run the Student Design Award Challenge. The RSA sets a very tough brief, and they ask students to rise to that challenge. 700 entries were received in the 2019 awards, and we have the winners of one of the categories. The two students with me just now followed the design brief, which was to use circular design principles to design something for emergency medical care. So please, a round of applause for Maire, Kane and Hannah Grogan. Maire, what on earth is that you've got in your hand there?
So we designed the Personal Patient Pack. It's a product service system which allows single-use devices that are used in an emergency to travel with the patient throughout their healthcare journey, which reduces waste by 67% per patient.
So we had to kind of create like a multi-dimensional system whenever we devised the concept. So we used existing systems already in place in the healthcare sector, for example, the RFID technology service, as well as the laundry service already in place. And then we also had to create our own service, like the digitalising the patient records, so that our personal patient pack could also actually work in the healthcare sector, not only in the HSE, the NHS, but globally. So
to talk us through the existing solution, someone has respiratory problems, maybe a medic comes to see them, and there's a multitude of different single-use products that person would be using in order to get them to hospital and feel stable. Is that correct? Is that the existing solution?
Yeah. So originally our personal patient pack would be used at the scene of the incident. Like you said, the paramedics would have the pack stocked in the ambulance, and they would go to the scene of the incident, and they would pull out a pack and go to the patient, and any of the devices that they used on the patient would be placed in the pack. So what's happening at the moment is there could be multiple of each device used and then thrown away after one use, whereas with our pack, if it was implemented, only one of each device would be placed. So you're saving an abundance of waste per patient. So we calculated it at 67%.
And one patient could actually be using 4 bag valve masks, maybe 4 delivery masks, which is around the back, 2 pairs of scissors, and then 2 nasal cannulas. So if one of each of these devices are used and travelling with the patient throughout their healthcare journey, it reduces waste dramatically. Not only waste, but also costs for the hospital and for the paramedics, and also time, because these medical professionals don't have to actually assemble the devices as they're already pre-assembled. It saves a lot of time in that kind of stressful scenario as well.
Which is interesting as well, the bag valve mask, on the actual device itself, it says single patient use, not single use. Yet what's happening today is we're throwing out the bag valve mask after each use. So if we apply our theory of keeping one device with the patient and apply this to all equipment that you're using in not only airway management but all medical devices,
medical care.
so it's definitely a solution for the future.
But the RFID element as well is interesting, isn't it? Because that gives the medical staff a record of who's been using it and why they've been using it. That's part of the solution too, right? It's quite clever.
Yeah, we were talking to one infection control officer within a hospital in Dublin, and she said that as long as the personal patient pack is fully traceable to the patient, that means that there's no risk of cross-contamination or the pack being displaced somewhere. So they always know who owns it and actually how many of each devices are being used in the patient. So it was a good way of actually quantifying how many devices are used and the total cost of care as well. So the RFID chip would be placed on the top here with a handle, and once the paramedic is taking the patient records, they scan the pack itself and connect the patient with their patient records. So these records are sent then to the hospital in real time, so then the hospital can be aware of what's coming in and who the patient is. So it's making for a more streamlined service as well. And
not only did we research RFID, we also researched into QR coding and NFC technology, but because the RFID service is already available, we're piggybacking on is an existing system already in place. So it's not like we have to redesign a system. We're actually using what's there, so we're saving money.
Smart.
Yeah.
Do you have backgrounds in the medical industry?
We both did. We did industrial design for our undergraduate degree, but we did a year's placement both in medical design companies in Ireland.
And in September we're starting our medical device design masters for a year in the National College of Art and Design in Dublin. So it'll give us, I suppose, more exposure to the validation and verification information that's needed to bring a medical device across the borderlines to be available in the healthcare sector. So,
and even thinking sustainability with medical devices, it's not really thought of high importance at the moment, but definitely we're going to hopefully bring it into our masters as well, and always think sustainable in terms of designing medical devices.
So when you looked at the brief the RSA had set, it didn't seem overwhelming to you then, I guess, given everything you've just told us, that you could go and work with medics to try and come to some sort of design solution?
Yeah, we had contacts in the area definitely, but I suppose previously we had never put sustainability and healthcare together. Whenever we did our research at the beginning of the project, we talked to lots of healthcare professionals, and they said saving a life comes before sustainability. And changing that way of thinking is something that we thought was a challenge in itself.
To be clear, you weren't saying sustainability matters more than saving lives. You were integrating the idea.
Yeah. So that's how we came to looking into the circular principles of the MacArthur Foundation, and then we applied not only these principles to our overall idea, but in generating the pack itself. So the pack here is made out of polycotton material, which the nurses' and doctors' uniform is already made from. Therefore, it abides by current laundry process regulations available in the hospital. So our pack would be placed in a laundry bin at the end of its life cycle after we added up as 100 plus washes that this can withdraw. So this we placed in the laundry bin, and therefore the polycotton doesn't rip in any way because it withstands. Also the writing that we added to the pack, it's all embroidered on rather than using ink because of the high temperatures of the laundry process. The colours we used, the white, in case this got soiled at the scene of an accident, or say beside it, if it was beside the patient's bed, then attention could be brought to it as quickly as possible, and it could be put in the laundry bin as quickly as possible, and then a new pack would be issued to that patient and scanned and connected to the patient records. And then also the orange toggles, just add attention to the parts that are needed in the pack if opening certain areas to get at the device itself. And then also the pack is designed for disassembly, so no adhesives or plastic components are used. So at the end of its life, it can be taken apart and all parts can be put in the different bins.
When someone designs something, it tends never to be the first idea they come up with that sits in front of us as a finished product. You tell us a little bit about that design process that you went through and some of the frustrations and maybe failures you had along the way.
We went through 9 iterations of the pack itself, so it started off as a paper bag or something. It was like a plastic bag really, and then as the process went on, we kind of reduced the amount of material because obviously we don't want to design something that's causing more waste within the area, so we wanted to minimise it as much as possible. And the idea actually stemmed from a conversation we had with a paramedic in a rural part of Ireland, and he said that he was aware of the huge amount of waste that's created after, you know, the scene of an incident, and he said, what if these devices, like, they're thrown out straight away after the patient used them? What if they could travel with the patient and throughout their healthcare journey? So that was an idea that he had at the beginning, and we thought, okay, what is this sort of thing that we're going to carry the devices in? So that's when all of the iterations came, and this is the latest one anyway. And
even getting exposure to as many contacts as we did, like infection control and procurement department in one of the most prestigious hospitals in Ireland, they told us things that we wouldn't have thought of as designers, like Velcro being used in a medical design product would draw bacteria, so it would be a high area for infection or contamination. And then also the magnets, say, if we were to bring that through to the laundry process, it would stick to the inside of the drum, you know, and so we had to use like very minimal strength magnets. And, you know, we wouldn't have had this information before until we got speaking to them, and they gave us tips and tricks of what to use. And then obviously we have the pack we have today, and it's our final concept and model, so we're really happy with it.
And were there some naysayers along the way who told you that this would never work?
Yeah, definitely.
I think the RFID was the main thing about implementing it, because we were always aware of the cross-contamination, and when we were talking to people within the hospital, we had to kind of reassure them that it would be okay brought through. So the implementation of RFID means that it's fully traceable to the patient, so that it kind of gives that extra bit of reassurance that it's not going to pass on to someone else. And I think that was convincing people that it is okay to bring it forward. It was the main thing as well.
And even going back with our final pack to the healthcare professionals that we talked to at the beginning about our initial idea, that we're completely against carrying single-use devices. The thought of them, the risk of contamination was too high, and we said, well, what if we could get confirmation from infection control that this would actually be viable? So whenever we went back to them with our pack and showed them that this is an airway management pack, they actually could say, I can see this being a pack that could be used in other areas of care. So it's not just stopping at airway management, like tracheostomy care, among many others, is what the future of this is. So we hope that we can bring it to them in the future, you know.
And tell us about that future. What next for this PPP, as you call it?
Yeah.
Is it going to be commercialised?
Well, I suppose that the last 3 months we've won 3 awards. So the D&AD white and wooden pencil, about our communication design of circular economy through the healthcare sector, and then we got shortlisted for the Universal Design Grand Challenge, and then we also got some media attention from the Minister of Health, Simon Harris, in Ireland. saying how good of work it was. So that gave us confidence to believe that this could be brought into NHS, HSC, as I said before, and globally. You know, it shouldn't just stop here.
Yeah, it's about convincing the bigger bodies about the benefits of it and trying to get them on board. So at the moment we're going to push forward and see how far we can bring it.
Well, best of luck with that. I've really enjoyed chatting to you today, so thank you very much, Maire and Hannah, for telling us about your award-winning design.
Thank you.
And thank you very much for everyone watching online. Whether you put questions in or not, we've really enjoyed you being with us on this journey. We've heard about leather that can be made from coconut milk. We've heard about a fashion revolution happening in Thailand and all around the world, and medical devices designed according to circular principles. This has been The Diff. I've been Colin. Thanks very much for watching.
We need to start making more conscious material choices.
Set up an initiative called Make Fashion Circular.
It's a tsunami of change.